Hello, everyone. This is Whitney Will of Starhearth Astrology, and I'm here today with my friend Jaime Wright. And we are going to slog our way through all of the astrology of 2022. So grab your snacks, grab your water bottles, grab your planners, and and join us. Jaime, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I always love diving into these forecasts together. We've got a big chunk of time, but I'm excited.
Yeah. So we are going to dive into the astrology of 2022. We are going to try and give you guys sketches and loose watercolors of the qualitative time experience and not get too buried in every single little transit. Jaime is in charge of making sure we don't. Because I'm very susceptible to that. So here I am delegating responsibility right off the bat. So let's get into it. So as the year begins, we're coming off of like a week, 10 days at the end of the year where we have some kind of big stuff happening. So kind of let's set the scene for New Year's.
Yeah, it's a lot. I feel like that very end, it's like the very end of 2021 is like, okay, we've finished up this era and now we're starting a new one, and we're going to start all of these new things at once. So we have the Venus retrograde starting on the 19th in Capricorn, stationing retrograde conjoined to Pluto. And then depending on what nodes you use, either mean or true, so the mean node's going to Scorpio and Taurus on the 22nd, or in January if you use the other system. But it's really like we're like passing the torch with the eclipse as the year changes.
Yeah.
And then we have the final Saturn Uranus square
on Christmas Eve, goes exact.
And then Jupiter goes into Pisces on the 28th.
Yeah.
And so that's a lot. And I feel like with the Saturn, that being the final Saturn Uranus square, it's like that's the final exact square. But then for much of 2022, they're like almost square.
They're so close. And in the fall, they even get into the same degree. They just don't perfect to the arc minute. So it's almost like, this is the final punch on the loudspeaker, but you're going to be in the echo chamber of it for like all of 2022.
Yes. And it's like, in this way of like, in 2021, we maybe saw these sort of exact battles of it, but it's like we're still dealing with that aftershock and that like separating energy, but it's like separating energy that won't separate. It's like they keep trying to go back to the brawl at the bar, and their friends are like, no, don't confront that person again. We're going to pull you away.
Right. And I think there's going to be so much frustration around like maybe some like not things getting back to normal, but like trying to create a new normal, and other people being like, no, we don't, like we haven't accomplished what we wanted to accomplish in all of this instability. So like, I think trying to people being sick of instability and people feeling like we didn't capitalize on it enough in terms of like social change or personal change or stuff, and tension with that. And I think, the question that this Venus retrograde really brings us into heading into the year, because she'll be retrograde until the end of January, and she'll be in Capricorn until the beginning of March, really is like, what is valuable about our institutions and our traditions. And I think, we'll see like the questions of yeah, probably supply chain stuff around the holidays and like heading into January, kind of fueled by that, but triggered by, Uranus and Taurus and yeah, and these Saturn themes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I feel like it's like both that Venus retrograde and the Saturn Uranus square. It's like all of this heavy Saturn stuff because it's all Capricorn and it's all Aquarius, but it's like averse Saturn stuff. It's like we're dealing with both the Capricorn side of Saturn and the Aquarius
Yeah.
side of Saturn.
Yeah. And all of these, I mean, the nodes going into earth and water, Jupiter going into water, Venus is in earth, Uranus is in earth. Like Saturn is the only, it's trying to like dry us off a little bit. I feel like it's almost like we enter the new year just not like with not a lot of like waxing energy, like there's not a lot of like inspirational fire.
Totally. Totally. Well, and it's sort of like the inspirational fire, the most fire really is that Saturn Uranus square in a certain way. That's the most sort of like clash. Yeah. I mean, I guess Venus conjunct Pluto is also a clash, but that's such a marrow deep kind of clash.
You're being swallowed by the earth more than like
yeah, it's like going into quicksand, and then Saturn Uranus is like, okay, I know you're in quicksand, but but I'm also causing an earthquake, so you have to like collect all your goodies, and figure out what's important to you. But I think that's why like all of this energy at the beginning of the year, it's like, yes, it's like new and it is a lot of change, like especially Jupiter going into Pisces. But it's also all themes that we on some level dealt with in 2021, like the Saturn Uranus, and like we got the like preview of the Taurus Scorpio eclipse this in November.
Yeah. And Jupiter in Pisces we had a taste of.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like the Venus retrograde in many ways, like how I've been framing it a lot, is like, because it's this Venus retrograde that's starting conjunct Pluto at this sort of, we're getting finally to the end degrees of Pluto and Capricorn. And in many ways, we're like reviewing and maybe sort of trying to heal, but also work through all the stuff that's been going on since Pluto entered Capricorn
in 2008. Yeah. Yeah, right. Because we're in the final throes of it. In 2023, Pluto goes into Aquarius.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So,
and we were like, and the last, because of the Venus retrograde cycle being on this 8-year cycle, the last Venus retrograde in Capricorn in 2013, 2014, I think stationed direct conjunct Pluto. So that was also a Plutonian Venus retrograde, but that one was more like we're still in the middle of it. And this one feels more like we're at the end.
Yeah. And I think, right, to lean into January, the Mercury retrograde of January stations direct on top of Pluto. So it's almost like, we're gonna feel it all in the Venusian way. And then, right, and then Mercury's gonna help us figure it out, hopefully.
Hopefully. Yeah, but that's all to say, it's like, I feel like in general, like we're kicking off 2022 with all this it's like new stuff that's also old stuff.
Right. Well, because you're not the same person that you were at the beginning of 2021, right? Like nobody is. We are just like, you are a fixed sign. You have been worn in the grindstone of your transits.
Right. And if you're a cardinal person, you're honestly still recovering from like 2018, 2019, 2020.
And if you're mutable, there are some transits coming for you.
Yes. And if you're mutable, you also just had all your eclipses on your angles. And so even though you liked the change maybe more than the fixed signs do, there's still integration. So I guess maybe, it's like the theme in 2022 is a lot of like integration. Maybe of things you thought you already integrated, kind of energy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So the new year starts off. This feels like a very new year to me that it doesn't seem like great for New Year's parties, but that there's a new moon on January 2nd. It's just like,
Mhm.
oh, that's kind of nice. There's a new moon on like the first day of the year.
Yeah.
It's, it's trine Uranus, but that trine feels like, oh, there's like a solution focused. It's like,
Mhm.
okay, we've got a new beginning in Capricorn. Like things are gonna be okay.
Yeah. Even though we're still like we're like in the thick of the Venus retrograde.
Yeah.
It still it's like not, it's in a different part of Capricorn.
Mm-hmm.
And I also really do like those. I feel like the Uranus trines, especially even in the earth signs, can just be this kind of like gentle awakening of like, okay, like, yeah, I'm giving you momentum.
Yeah.
I'm giving you energy to keep going.
Yeah.
Like you can do it. We're gonna change things from the ground up and it's gonna be fun kind of vibe.
Yeah. Capricorn's like, okay, send me your wish list. I'm gonna figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
And Mercury moves into Aquarius. So we have kind of Mercury starting out the year in a fresh sign as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's already in the shadow of its retrograde, but so there's like, we're just stumbling upon this, like, oh, this is new, and actually it's just old.
Totally. Then Mercury goes retrograde.
Mm-hmm.
And that second week of January, or I guess mid January, starting the 14th, is Mercury goes retrograde. Then there's the Cancer full moon opposite Pluto.
Pluto is just, it's just like the Dementor in the back of the room of all of 2022.
Yeah. The Pluto and Capricorn transit is like not going quietly, which this is even like beyond the scope of this video, but it's also like all of this Pluto stuff in the beginning of the year is also setting us up for like the exact US Pluto return, the first exact one in February. So that's lurking. But it's like mid-January, it's like we're still in the thick of Venus retrograde. Mercury goes retrograde. Cancer full moon.
Which, yeah, all the feels, staring down all the fears.
Mm-hmm.
And Uranus stations direct.
Mm-hmm. On the 18th. It's just interesting because Mercury, I think the past few years when Uranus has stationed direct in January, that has been like the beginning of like all the planets are direct for the first time. But this year we've got Mercury and Venus both retrograde still. But Uranus stationing direct is like, I think it's one of those transits that you don't even think about how calm things have been while it's been retrograde, I guess, until it's direct.
Yeah. And we're still kind of cleaning up from the last time it stationed direct, which was like right around the January 6th insurrection was really close to its station.
Yeah, I think it was just like a couple days or a week before maybe. But this time at least it's not stationing direct conjunct Mars. We have a different Uranus Mars moment this year. But I do think that maybe if like part of January is the beginning of it is like, okay, we're starting fresh but we're also integrating that midpoint with that full moon and Uranus stationing direct is like, that's just like a lot is being integrated, a lot of feels, a lot of forward motion. And definitely sort of like, okay, I thought this was going to be more placid and slow, and now things are kicking into gear a bit.
Yeah. Yeah. Then we have Mars kind of join the party in Capricorn,
Mm-hmm.
which, right, there's kind of like, okay, Uranus is direct, things are going to happen. And then Mars has been like cleaning up the party in Sag.
Yeah.
And
It,
enters Capricorn.
mm-hmm.
And right around the same time, right? So Mars is going to enter the beginning of Capricorn, and the next day Mercury retrogrades back into Capricorn.
Mm-hmm.
So the sun is going to be in Aquarius at this point, but we almost have just this very long extended Capricorn season of Venus in Capricorn, Mars in Capricorn, Mercury in Capricorn. All the personal planets are back there.
Mm-hmm.
um
Yeah. And, and it's like the last time Mars was in Capricorn was February and March 2020. It was different because Saturn was there still. But I do think this sort of like Mars going into Capricorn on that day, we then are entering into this extended period of Venus and Mars co-presence that's going to last throughout the spring. And it's in this very sort of like rare configuration where those two, because of Venus's retrograde and Mars naturally moving a bit slower than Venus, usually when Venus is moving at regular speed, but at this point they're basically moving at the same speed.
Yeah. So they're just like holding hands and walking through the second half of Capricorn into Aquarius. Which this I don't know. I feel good about it. Maybe it's like the earthiness, and maybe we're getting like a little bit whatever. We can move faster, right? Venus goes direct, and Mars is right there. And it's not until till early February that they're going to be together. But then, you've got Venus recovering from this retrograde. You've got Mercury about to station direct in early February. And it just feels like, okay, whatever Venus figures out during her retrograde, Mars is kind of there to execute. And they're just like on the same team for a while.
Yeah. I mean,
I don't like when they can join Pluto at the same time, but
yeah, I mean, I think that whole like them being co-present and then Venus going direct, right? It's like it is them. What's interesting is that like we just had the Venus Mars conjunction like back in July in Leo. And I do feel like the Venus Mars conjunctions are this really great time of being able to like really reset relationship dynamics and be like, what's going on with how I'm connecting with people and how I'm separating with people and like what's my motivation. But usually that'll only I like usually the way their cycles work, I think it's like every 2 years. But because of this retrograde, it's like we had one in July, and now it's like we had the one in July that I think for many people, for me definitely felt like, oh, this is like this huge reset of a lot of motivations and a lot of stuff. But then coming back together, but that was also in Leo, so that was like resetting motivations of like personal whatever ego needs and desires. And now it's almost like, okay, we reset all those ego needs and desires, but there's a lot of work we need to do this year. And so we're getting together in these Saturnian signs.
Right. And, it's so funny because in my life, right, that Venus Mars conjunction in Leo was on my natal Venus in my 7th house. I like chose my wedding date around it. That was like, this is my relationship. And then my husband's 7th house is Capricorn. And so it's almost like, okay, and now we're going to do things by your terms.
Totally. Yeah, that's really interesting. And I feel like a lot of people are going to have that dynamic of like personal needs versus like partnership needs, or just like also in Capricorn, it's like foundational needs and like it's just on like a societal level and like a community level.
Yeah, but they're together, right? And then, right, so what happens is we've got Venus stationing, Mars coming through Capricorn. Venus moves direct before they come into that conjunction, but Mars is moving just faster than Venus because of she's moving so slow with the retrograde. So we get that first exact hit with Mars getting ahead, and then very quickly Venus comes and we get a second hit at 0 Aquarius, which is, it's kind of like, it's like the minor great conjunction that we had at the end of 2020. Because, right, so at the end of 2020, we had the once every 20-year conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn at 0 Aquarius. And so we're getting like the night sect version of that.
Oh yeah, totally. The graders and the lessers. And it's at almost the same, it's at 0 Aquarius.
Yeah. Okay. So let's catch up. So Venus went direct at the end of January. We've been straddling January and February. There's an Aquarius new moon that is square to Uranus. So that is exciting. At the very end, we run into these months where like January and March have 3 lunations each, and February only gets 1 because of just the way that they, whatever. February small. But so yeah, January 30th, we have that Aquarius new moon. Square Uranus. We head into February. We got Mercury stations direct February 3rd, conjunct Pluto. We get the Sun conjoining Saturn, which this will be right the last conjunction. No, we'll get one more with Saturn and Aquarius at the very end. In 2023. But right, this is a yearly transit where the synodic cycle of the Sun and Saturn.
Last year on the day that the Sun and Saturn were conjoined, I saw a pack of vultures outside of a coffee shop, and that was just such a perfect symbol for what was happening. Just all these black birds. But it was like these black, huge, like giant vultures who were all swarming around this like big dumpster. And I had never seen them in this area before. And it was like, and it's this very like Sun Saturn of like, Saturn has been given like an ego for a moment of like this sun. I'm going to take up space too and see how you like it when I do.
Yeah. And I'm going to like tear up this dead stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I was driving to, and like, it's like, I thought they were like crows from a distance. And then I realized how big they were. And I kept driving closer to them and they wouldn't disperse. Like I had to wait for them to all keep crossing through this parking lot. They were not
waiting. Very, very Saturn being like, I'm gonna waddle my way out of your way.
Exactly. Which that I just feel like that sort of Saturnian vibe is like really like the whole vibe of like January, February, and March is like, as much as there's other stuff going on that we'll get into with like Jupiter and Pisces and all of that, it's like we're really seeped in the different Saturn stories and parts of our chart.
Yeah, embrace it or don't, but it's going to take a long time either way.
Right. And it's like we're also in that Capricorn Aquarius stuff in the way that we also were like in 2020, especially like we had the big Capricorn pile up, but that I feel like, and it's like you talking about it being like the minor great conjunction, that Venus-Mars conjunction is like, the stuff in 2020 felt so obviously societal and epochal. And this is much more like our personal feelies of the Capricorn and Aquarius stuff.
Yeah.
It's all like on a more personal planet level.
Yeah, for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Then we've got Mercury moves into Aquarius, right? So all of the Mercury retrogrades in 2022 start in air signs and station direct in earth signs. So we've got a year where, right, like all of the ones in 2021 were just in air signs. And then we get this one straddling the elements. And then the 2023 ones will be mostly in earth signs, if not entirely. And so we're kind of in between there. So we've got Mercury moving into Aquarius again, just like it did on January 2nd, kind of get like this refresh as it clears the shadow of its retrograde.
Mm-hmm.
Then we have a Leo full moon on the 16th, which is exactly square to the nodes.
Yeah.
Which means we're halfway in between eclipse seasons, which kind of feels like, oh, okay, whoa, that was fast.
Yeah, I know, like, wasn't there just, but I guess because we're like shifting eclipse season, it like shifts a little earlier. So we get a shorter break.
Yeah. And so, yeah, we've got that Leo new moon. There's also that, like the first exact Mars Venus conjunction happens that day as part of that chart, which just feels like very, it's not aspecting that full moon. Sorry, do I keep saying new moon? Goodness.
Okay.
The Leo full moon, 28 degrees. There's Mars Venus conjunction in Capricorn at 16 degrees. In a loose trine to Uranus. So there again, we've got the like Uranian. I think, I like the Uranus trines to Capricorn. So many of the millennials have Uranus in Capricorn natally. There's a little bit of like this like remembrance of like, we can use this. We can use the tradition and the establishment and the way things are done as informed by like, how are we going to eat through the apocalypse? How are we going to stabilize the food system? Totally. And I think it's so funny, right? We're all of the discussion and like Twitter and stuff about billionaires solving world hunger. I think it's going to be interesting seeing like Uranus stimulated in these ways. Like, oh, okay, are you actually going to do it? Maybe.
I feel like many people are very pessimistic about it, but I'm like, I don't know. There's the energy is maybe there to like.
Right. I feel like if they're like pissing contest of going into space, like they feel like they can't win because everybody's doing it now. Having your name as like solving world hunger is maybe the next biggest thing.
Right. It's like, how can we incite that competition between them?
Right.
Instead of like the competition of like, who's going to build like the coolest rocket? Like, how do you
that burns like $100,000 of fuel in 5 minutes.
Right. But it like the rocket makes more sense in their whole like dick slinging contest that they're always in. But you're like, how do you make solving hunger, solving poverty of all kinds, like into that? Which maybe that's what it's like, you talking about like millennials, like the Uranus and Capricorn signature. It's like interesting because it's like millennial with that Uranus and Capricorn energy, like we're so good at being like, this is what's wrong with society, but then like we're not good at actually like knowing like what you need to do to fix it, which Uranus and Taurus is a little bit more like hands-on problem solving.
Right. And partially because it's putting things in such stark terms. Like if you don't fix it, you're not going to eat. If you don't fix it, you're not going to have healthcare. If you
right. Because
we're losing California, which grows all of our fruit. We're losing Washington, which grows all of our cabbages.
We have like the bees are dying, like this stuff. Yeah, but I do think that too is like a lot of what's going on in this like early part of the year with the emphasis on the Aquarius and the Capricorn stuff, but then like the Capricorn interplaying with Uranus and Taurus, and yeah, like wrapping our minds around what we actually need to tangibly do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I feel like it's just like so much practical problem solving in the beginning of the year.
Mm-hmm.
And then we head into a new moon first thing in March, conjunct Jupiter. Okay. I think this is a nice lunation. There's like, okay. There's also Venus and Mars conjoining Pluto at the same time. But like, besides that part,
yeah, I mean, not to make this about me, but this is right before my birthday, so I've done a lot of zhuzhing of how I think this is going to be a great time in the world. It's fine, because I want my solar return to seem positive, but
right. And not is it just a new moon conjunct Pluto, but it's a new moon, or sorry, Jupiter. But it's a new moon in Jupiter's sign, conjunct Jupiter.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I feel like this is a good time to also touch on like that, like the whole sort of Jupiter and Pisces transit that's going on in like the background of the whole beginning of the year while we're going through the heavy Plutonian, Capricorn, Aquarius stuff. Is like the annoying part about this Jupiter and Pisces transit is that like Jupiter and Pisces is so, so effervescent and so celebratory, and it's Jupiter back in its home sign, but we're also hitting it when Jupiter is at like the fastest point of its cycle, because Jupiter moves the fastest around the Cazimi, and so it's like running through Pisces.
Right. We get like 5 months of Jupiter and Pisces, and it was like, that's what you got.
And if you have like these Pisces, like if you have Pisces placements at like 0, 1, or 2 degrees, you got sort of a nice, juicy little retrograde station sit of it, like this past spring. But if you have sort of Jupiter between like 3 degrees and like 28 degrees Pisces, you're just getting this like sort of sprint run of Jupiter, which is sort of like a one-hit wonder of like, I have to like, as much as there's all this heavy stuff, we do have this kind of blessing from Jupiter and Pisces. And this new moon, I think, is kind of emphasizing of like, oh yeah, all this heavy stuff is going on, but like, remember, there is like abundance to be found somewhere. There is some joy to be found somewhere.
Right. Yeah. Like
it's also maybe fleeting, or you have to like drink it up while it's here for you.
Yeah. Pisces is my second house. And so and Capricorn is my 12th. And so it's like, okay, you may be like, you never think you're going to leave therapy. Which, spoiler, I'm a therapist, so of course I'm never going to leave therapy. But then it's like, okay, but you're making money at least while you're doing it. Maybe. Because then we've got that Venus-Mars conjunction on top of Pluto the next day. So it's like, Venus, right? Part of this retrograde is her 3 conjunctions with Pluto. And this is the final one. But Mars is with her.
Right. And Venus and Mars are still kind of slowly coming up to their exact final conjunction, but they both like hit Pluto right in a row first. I will say that I think in the Venus Mars conjunction, like I think the first one that we get in Capricorn is a little bit more energy, like it is a little bit less melancholy. Like that's the one I think that's a little bit more like energizing, even though it's Mars coming on top of Venus. But then coming into this second one is a little bit like, okay, I feel like that's the one that's a little bit more like the sad Venus Mars conjunction potentially. But maybe not sad. And I'm really basing this off the fact of like, I think about like, I guess in like very ancient texts, it's like because technically like Venus is being maltreated by Mars in their conjunction. But I think the way they would write about it is that it was only truly being maltreated if Venus was the one that conjoined Mars, not the other way around.
Yeah.
I may be like misquoting this, but I'm pretty sure that first it's like Venus coming upon Mars is like more harsh than Mars coming upon Venus.
Yeah. And so in that second one, it's going to be Venus coming upon Mars. And this, they are both conjoining Pluto on this day, and they're moving together, but this isn't a day of their exact conjunction. They're just so close together that it's happening at the same time.
Yeah. And it's all sitting at like 27 Capricorn, and then Venus and Mars are still in this like close Capricorn. But then that's all. It's like we also just had that really nice new moon with Jupiter and the Jupiter Cazimi, which is so much different than the Saturn Cazimi. If like the Saturn Cazimi is like the vultures, then the Jupiter Cazimi is like, it's like 9 of Cups. Like I have fresh flowers for all of you energy. But it's also like but it's also, I guess it's like we're getting this happy moment at the end of a lot of this like sort of dark, heavy work we've been doing for the past several months with all these Saturnian transits.
Yeah. Yeah. But then we have the sun conjoin Jupiter. I feel like on the same day, and that it feels like this kind of like making peace with whatever happens, and like almost the end of the retrograde. Like if you're wrestling with a relationship or with a job or whatever, it's almost like, Venus and Mars come together. They're like, okay, we're in Capricorn. We can work this out. It's going to be heavy. Like we're going to do the work. It's going to be hard. They both conjoin Pluto, and they're like, whoa, actually maybe not. And then it almost feels like their conjunction in Aquarius is a little bit like, okay, it's not going to work, but we can be friends.
We can be friends. And then them conjoining in Aquarius then comes in this long period where Venus is like they finally start separating after being within a degree of each other for like weeks and weeks.
For weeks.
But then Venus is like heading towards Saturn. So she's kind of like going from one bad boy to the other.
Can we go back to how the sun conjoins Jupiter in Pisces?
Yeah. No, and I'm not even saying this to be like negative Nancy, but it is like, I don't know. Venus is kind of Venus, for the first part of the year, she's like really going through it. It's like very shadow work vibes, like just heavy integration vibes to me.
Right. And all my Aquarius risings that are having this transit, like I will be in the 12th house. Please reach out to me or do my Venus and Capricorn class that I'm doing with my friend Anya, where we kind of create a community container to move through this because it can be a lot. Yeah. And then we'll have, sorry, I feel like I'm like pushing us along. I'm like, can we be done?
No, you should.
Okay. So then we've got Mercury into Pisces on the 9th, on March 9th.
And that's when we start breaking up a lot of the Capricorn period.
It's like that second half of March like pulls us out of the first quarter of the year, both like calendar wise, but also astrology wise. And Venus, when she, at the beginning of March moves out of the shadow of her retrograde to, but I think it'll really be that like separating from Mars. That's really like leaving the topics of the retrograde.
She's separating from Mars. She's in a new sign, and she's like moving at her regular speed.
Yeah.
Again. And Mercury also is finally sort of back up to speed at this point. I mean, I guess Mercury's been more up to speed for a while now, but we're getting to the part of the year where Mercury starts sort of zipping through the zodiac.
Yeah, right. So Mercury is going to go into Pisces on March 9th, and then it goes into Aries on March 27th, right? So we have less than 3 weeks of Mercury in Pisces, which thank goodness, because I feel like we've been having these, right? We had those 2 super long Mercury retrogrades in Pisces,
right?
Maybe 2019 and 2020. Like, let's be done with those.
Yeah. I almost feel like that Mercury going into Pisces at that point is going to be like everyone writing their like sappy poetry and songs about all the stuff that was going on in the first couple months of the year.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, this like processing of all of that, hopefully, right? Like artistically, Mercury in Pisces is going to conjoin Jupiter, and it's going to conjoin Neptune, and yeah, the creativity of that. But then it's like, it goes into, there's a Virgo full moon right in the middle of that, of just like, okay, organize it, clean it up, whatever.
Yeah.
Like, okay, compartmentalize. And then Mercury goes into Aries, and you're just like, okay, now we're doing
into Aries, and we started Aries season. And that's sort of like when we start Aries season and Mercury going into Aries, right? Like, we were talking earlier about how we sort of start the year and it's like earth energy, water energy. And this is like, we're finally getting some fire on the scene for like really kind of the first time all year.
Right. It's the first, we had Mars in Sag as we entered the year, but it's the first time since Mars went into Capricorn that we have anything in fire. That's hard. I feel like, just natally, when people don't have any fire in their chart, I notice like depression takes longer.
I have no fire in my chart, and it's difficult. You have to find fire elsewhere.
Yeah. So everyone, please go, like travel to the desert. Sit outside with a big bonfire in the desert. Dry yourself off.
Like, yeah, it's like literally like go do some hikes, like do something that makes you feel accomplished in that part of the year, like you've been through a lot. Get a pep talk, request a pep talk from your fieriest friend. Yeah.
My fire Mercury will give out free pep talks always. Come find me. And then
that will be
on the very last, what?
That's just going to be a real shift once we get to Aries season. I'm
excited
for that.
And we have an Aries new moon, conjunct Mercury.
Is that the day of the Cazimi, or no? But it's sort of
it's very close. The Cazimi is like 2 days afterwards.
Got it.
Let's see. Yeah, and so that brings us halfway in between Mercury retrogrades. It's gonna be, I think the Cazimi is April 2nd.
Got it. Yeah.
On the same day that Mars conjoins Saturn.
Yes. Ruling Mercury and the Sun. The Mars is,
Yeah. So, right, Venus will be clear of Saturn. And then finally, we get Venus into Pisces on April 5th.
And that's entering like the sort of next era.
Yeah. So, we're in Q2 of the year. And we got that fire that kind of like pulled us out of Q1. And Venus's hair is on fire, and she just like runs and dunks it into Pisces. or more like she's like dying of hypothermia from her conjunction with Saturn and like jumps into the hot tub of Pisces.
Sorry, you were breaking up for a second, but now we're back. We're back.
Hopefully this recording is okay.
Yeah. I think my internet is okay. Yeah. No, yeah, so you were in like quarter 2, Venus is going into Pisces.
Yeah, she's going into the place of her exaltation. It's really sweet. We get Venus in Pisces with Jupiter in Pisces. We've got both the benefics.
We've got the benefics in their home and their exaltation. Again, Jupiter is like running through Pisces, but we're getting like Jupiter's getting like more and more sort of enabling energy from other planets at this point.
Yeah, and then we get Mercury into Taurus on the 10th, which is really nice because Mercury heads into Taurus, but Venus its ruler is exalted. So now like we're back to these kind of like water and earth, but it's doing a lot better.
Yeah, everything's in like much better condition.
Yeah.
But it's like at this point is also when we're heading in slowly to eclipse season.
Yeah. So we have, then Mars goes into Pisces, which is like, I mean, I think that will be really a shift from kind of the intellectual dismissals of Mars and Aquarius.
Yeah. Mars and Pisces is like I like that placement in a certain way because it is even though it sort of is not traditionally dignified in any way, like there is something nice. It's like a nice swim. It's like a nice sort of lap swim.
Especially with Venus and Jupiter there.
But it's also like, it's like Mercury is in Taurus, but now we're like heading into this period where we're getting, after this first era of the year that was so Saturnian, we're now heading into this sort of mutable Piscean chaos.
Very Jupiterian. I feel like there's a lot of indulgence in this, like in April. And I think it might almost get, I mean, I'm very Saturnian, so I'm like, oh gosh, don't go overboard. Like, don't. Yeah. But I think it will be right. We've got like Mercury's like, I just want to talk about food. Like, we are only watching cooking shows. Venus and Jupiter are like laying out the spread. Like, Mars, put down your sword and shield, come to the feast, party like a warrior. And then okay, and then we head into the full moon, which is decidedly not chill.
No.
A Libra full moon square to Pluto, which I feel like is the ghost of Mercury retrograde past.
It's the ghost
because the Mercury retrograde in Libra that we had in the fall of 2021 it's in the same degree square to Pluto, and here we have a Libra full moon square Pluto. And it's like, right, it's like we almost forgot Pluto was there for a second.
For like a couple weeks. And it's also, it's like similar to the to that Mercury retrograde and also the Aries full moon that we had this past October that was square Pluto. Like, it's the same, which I also feel like all of these like cardinal lunations with Pluto are like kind of ghosts of like 2018, 2019, 2020.
Like,
that stuff again.
And it's like going to be squaring the degree that Venus went retrograde at. There's just like, right? It's almost like, okay, we like thought everything was cool and we were all in the party, and like, shoot.
Yeah. Well, but it's like, on the other hand, it is kind of like that lunation is happening, but it's also ruled by Venus and Pisces that's like coming up on conjoining Neptune. And I almost wonder if like society, like in the news kind of, it's like we're seeing things come up like from this time, like from that Mercury retrograde, like from this past fall or even from deeper in the past, but everyone is kind of so consumed with whatever other Piscean stuff is going on.
They're almost like intentionally ignoring it.
Yeah, like there's this sort of like want for escapism from it. And I'm not sure if it's like that is like penetrating the sense of escapism, because but then it's like we're going deep into, then it's like Venus is actually conjoining Neptune, we're going into the eclipse season after that. That so I'm like, I don't know, I think that is just going to be an interesting time of like things happening that like should make you sort of like grounded or humbled, but like are you maybe going there? I don't know. Yeah.
It's probably going to be one of those lunations that you point back to as like, oh, maybe that was more important than what I was doing.
Right.
Right. It's
Right.
like the moment that like you should have realized that your addiction was a problem, but you're just gonna like Neptune over that one.
Yeah. And yeah, looking at this astrology and like talking about this now, I'm like thinking about how, you know, all of this sort of Venus, Neptune, Jupiter, Piscean stuff, and how that's speaking to like drugs and the opioid crisis and all of that stuff that's going on. And I'm like, I do feel like something in that regard is gonna get like dropped and ignored, or like I don't know, there's gonna be some sort of revelation maybe about that stuff in that time that maybe is then forgotten until later. I don't know. There's something interesting about all that coming together.
Yeah.
It feels like truth coming out that's like ignored but digested and not acted upon until later, as you were saying.
Yeah. Okay, then we have in the very like final days of April, we've got Mercury into Gemini, which is going to be in the shadow of its retrograde. Pluto stations retrograde at 28 of Capricorn, so like just in the very end. And then we have a partial solar eclipse with Venus's exact conjunction with Jupiter on her exaltation degree.
Yeah. So that's going to be so intense.
And Venus is ruling that eclipse that happens at 10 degrees of Taurus. It's like, I don't even know how to put all of that stuff together, right? It's going to, like, obviously I'll be talking about it in forecast episodes, and I'll be talking about it in the individual episodes I do for the lunations, but it's just like 2022 has these like moments of just like a fever pitch of everything happening. And then these kind of quieter spaces. But this definitely feels like a fever pitch of a lot of different things happening at once.
Yeah. And this is like a fever pitch. And as you were talking about too before, it's like a fever pitch of stuff, but also like high likelihood of like dissociation from reality is happening. But I'm also just noticing too, as we're talking about this, that it's at 10 degrees of Taurus, which is the same degree that Uranus stations direct. So that's like a weird echo of 10 degrees Taurus.
Tying together January to this space. Okay, so then we head into May, And right, we're in the middle of eclipse season when May starts, kind of in between the April 30th eclipse and the May 15th eclipse. We have Venus move into Aries, which is a very different, right? Like we get the first half of Taurus season or the first third of Taurus season with Venus exalted. And now she goes into Aries, ruled by Mars.
Though I guess in the beginning of the month, she's still ruled by this Mars and Pisces. The chain of command is starting to get a little wacky in this time of year.
Yeah.
It's like Mercury and Taurus ruled by Venus and Aries. Ruled by Pisces.
Yeah. We have the sun conjoining Uranus in the middle, right? Like when things happen in between eclipses in this way, right? Like in between the 2 weeks of eclipses, they're just like, they're not subtle. Like,
no, because we're like in this eclipse portal, and this eclipse portal is like particularly trippy that we're in.
Yeah, and it'll be the first like full eclipse season with eclipses in Scorpio and Taurus. So we get that solar eclipse in Taurus, and then we're gonna get, well, let's get to it. Then we've got Jupiter moving into Aries, right? So like, thanks for your time in Pisces.
Yeah, your quick little sprint.
Now you're in Aries, and Mercury stations retrograde. So we've got Venus into Aries, the sun conjoining Uranus, Jupiter into Aries, and Mercury retrograde in Gemini, all in between eclipses. And so it just feels like the kind of like psychedelic pool party that led us into the first eclipse is like totally disbanded because of like a lightning storm.
Right. Well, yeah, it like honestly, like as you're talking about this, it's like that first eclipse feels like it's like psychedelic, you're at like a rave in Berlin, and then like this middle period is like you've gotten to like the daylight part of the rave, and everyone's like out and coming down from things and like looking for food, and some people like Venus and Aries is still like dancing, but it's like they're out just on the street doing it now, not in the club. It's like the party is like still going, but everyone's in their own sort of little chaos vibe.
Yeah. Mercury's trying to find a taxi to get home.
Right. And Jupiter in Aries is such a big presence.
Yeah. So let's talk about that, because that's definitely one of the headlines, right, of 2022 is Jupiter in Aries.
Definitely. And it's like coming off of Jupiter in Pisces, which is so is like a rushing is like you're in just the ocean, like vibing. And Jupiter in Aries is I don't like people who have their natal Jupiter in Aries. There's like a way where Jupiter like feels dignified in a certain way there, because it exudes this kind of confidence and like go get 'emness. But it's like Jupiter in a Mars sign, in like the masculine Mars sign, just being kind of like relentless search for truth, like relentless sort of search for meaning.
Like this like mission, like it almost becomes like like a vendetta of of like, right, like if they don't convince you, then they face like annihilation anxiety. And you're like, wait.
Right. Well, and it's like the Jupiter and Aries vibe is like Jupiter and Pisces just kind of gets what it wants and is chill with it. And Jupiter and Aries like generally gets stuff, but it's like it like shows you the effort it's making to acquire it. And as you were saying, it's like there is this kind of energy of like entitlement almost.
Yeah. Like Okay,
Or
maybe
like
this is
maybe
like
you and I read it as like Aquarian people as entitlement, but it's really just healthy self-esteem.
right. Okay, that's good because I was thinking about this transfer. This doesn't, maybe this is a really bad analogy, but you know how in The Wire, like in the later seasons of The Wire, as they're taking down the like drug families in Baltimore, you've seen The Wire, yeah?
I haven't seen The Wire,
Oh,
but
okay. So in the later seasons of The Wire, they're like taking down these like drug organization families. But those families, like, right, they were, yes, they were like distributing drugs, but they had a kind of internal code about how to take care of each other and like how to like keep each other out of prison. And like there was like this, I mean, still like brutal and violent and right, but there was a kind of code. And what they start running into in the later seasons of The Wire is like these organized crime, drug distribution that is much more brutal and violent. And there isn't a code about like protecting the people working for you. And so it becomes like a different thing. And that's making me feel like, right, like Jupiter and Pisces versus Jupiter and Aries. Jupiter and Pisces, it's like, yeah, we're like all in this together, kind of. We're all going to share in the bounty. And Jupiter and Aries, I feel like cares a lot less about sharing.
oh
A
yeah.
little bit more like, I'm going to use you.
To like get what I want. Absolutely. Absolutely. And in a way that like, sometimes you need that Aries energy. You need that fire energy.
Yeah.
When you think about the beginning of this year, the heavy, like sort of earth, water, air times at the beginning of the year, it's like that type of year was like starving for some Jupiter and Aries energy. Yeah. Yeah. No, but exactly. It's like Jupiter and Pisces is like a protection spell, and Jupiter and Aries is like every man for himself, just like figure it out.
And also, I'm the boss.
Yeah.
Right. Which, it's not going to like happen like that for everybody. Right. Like, but, maybe keep an eye on your Aries rising friends. Stay out of their way.
Yeah. Well, the Aries risings people are going to be like having the time of their life when that shift happens. After having Jupiter, a very strong Jupiter in the 12th, like making them do a lot of like face a lot of demons that are sort of that they usually can ignore. And now they're going to be back on their bullshit.
New me. Yeah.
But yeah, that happening on the same day as Mercury going retrograde in Gemini, just to me is screaming like people saying and doing whatever they want. It's very chaotic energy.
Yeah. And then we'll have a lunar eclipse, right? So it's like sometimes I forget when I'm talking about lunar eclipses, they're also full moons. So they're just like so much more. Yeah. And we've got, and this lunar eclipse is just, I mean, both the lunar eclipses this year are just these kind of, they're on the like torture rack in terms of, right? It's happening square to Saturn, like trine Mars, Neptune, which just feels like, oh, the Mars Neptune conjunction is happening like right.
Well, and that Mars Neptune conjunction is also ruling that lunar eclipse too.
Yeah.
And the previous eclipse, because it's a Scorpio.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And the previous eclipse is ruled by Venus Neptune. So it's like, yeah.
Right. And Neptune just, right, if nothing else, contributing to the confusion of like, what's even happening right here?
Right. Exactly. Because Mars is actually at that point in like the final part of Pisces, which I think is when it has like, I think maybe both term and triplicity dignity. Like it's very like Mars at the end of Pisces is very sort of like, it's like the piranha Pisces, I feel like. But it's with Neptune. So it's like a very strong, confused fighter underwater. Um, yeah, this is an intense time. I've also been calling this eclipse like the twin eclipse to the one we just had.
Yeah, right. Because it happens within 2 degrees, except for that, right? Like with this one, I feel like it's a little bit more intense, right? It's still going to be on algal, but the nodes are there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which I feel like is just strengthening a little bit because it's a lunar eclipse on the south node. So the moon is disappearing, but she's also like being constricted by the south node.
Mm-hmm. And she's already a fallen Scorpio moon.
Yeah, ruled by Mars with Neptune, I think. And Mercury is retrograde. It's whatever you go through on this eclipse, do not try to communicate it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I do think like in the world and our personal lives, it is going to be like this sort of bookend to whatever was like coming up at like this eclipse that we just had in this November eclipse of 2021. There's some echo of that, but it's like the total, whereas like the November 2021, like Taurus exalted lunar eclipse on the North Node is much more like opening up the can of worms, and this one is like trying to process it. But
and Saturn's more involved in this one, right? Because it's square Saturn. So Saturn is like, hold on a second. But it's just, right, it's frustrating because how do you contain something ruled by Mars conjunct Neptune and Pisces?
Yeah, you can't. It's like, yeah, it's very diffuse. This whole eclipse season is very it's like not clear who's leading this.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I was gonna say it's just everyone's in a free-for-all, like and then there's like bombs. Eclipses, right? Okay, so let's find our way out of it. We've got Mercury retrogrades back into Taurus, which at least it's not like spouting gibberish, mad, like manically spouting gibberish. It's kind of like quiet. It like gives itself a timeout, I feel like, in Taurus. The Cazimi happens right around then too, right? So the Cazimi, the midpoint of that Mercury retrograde happens at 0 degrees of Gemini. And then Mercury goes into Taurus. And so it's like you like kind of get like, hey, stop talking. You know, when someone's like, okay, you're digging yourself into a hole, just stop talking. Like that Cazimi is like, this is the stop talking. Like, we're gonna wait and see what happens. So then we've got we get Mercury back into Taurus, still retrograde, but back in the Earth sign. We have Mars move into Aries. And now it feels like with Mars getting dignity, like at least someone's in charge a little bit more.
Totally. I mean, this Mars is going to be like, because we're like, we've started Gemini season. Mars is going into Aries.
Yeah. And then right, like a few days later, Venus goes into Taurus. So it's like our personal stuff is finally getting sorted out. In the sense of like, right, like we had like the Saturn phase, and then we had the like dream rave. And then we had this like wild eclipse season. And now it's like, okay, Mars remembers who he is. Venus remembers, like Venus finally like finds her way home and like unlocks the door to her house.
Like, they're like both back in dignity, in some kind of dignity, but like the previous time they were in dignity that year, they were like involved in some really complicated, confusing stuff.
Right. And it's like when you,
it feels very like cleanup committee after all this crazy stuff that's been going on. But Mars is also in Aries and becoming super enabled because he's like immediately conjoining Jupiter about a week after. Enters. And Mars Jupiter conjunctions are pretty intense.
And especially, right, like this is the first one we've had in a Mars sign. This one actually happens opposite my natal Mars in Libra. I'm going to be like, what?
Yeah, I mean, I have a Mars Jupiter conjunction natally, but it's in Taurus, which is a little bit is not as fierce.
Right. Yes, you're a hardcore chiller.
Yeah, exactly. Who can occasionally, it's like I will push down the entire mountain, but I think about it for 3 years beforehand. Whereas this Mars Jupiter conjunction is just knocking over everything that it needs to clean up. It's like is both cleaning up and sort of destroying some stuff, maybe, but
right. I feel like it just feels really impatient. It's like we had eclipse season. Some part of eclipse season is feeling kind of like time is standing still despite all the chaos. We've got Mercury, right? Mercury ruling Gemini season, but it's still retrograde in Taurus right now. Like having a snack with Venus before it gets back out there. And Mars is like on the battlefield, but like nobody's there.
Right.
And he's like, if I just start firing cannons, like someone will come to fight me.
Right. Yeah.
But it is also the balsamic moon, which I feel like kind of cools down that a little bit because the next day we have a new moon. So I kind of like that, like the Mars Jupiter conjunction doesn't happen like during a full moon or something.
Totally. Yeah, no. Well, it's like we've already had enough chaos in that part of the month. And yeah, I think, that is definitely kind of a tempering quality. I do think now looking at this, it's like the second half of May is like once we sort of get the Mars into Aries and Venus into Taurus, even though Mercury is still retrograde, it is kind of maybe one of the more stable points of the year. Even though it's just post-eclipse season. So it's also doing a lot of like cleanup and
right. I mean, it's the calm after the storm. Like, you know, when you go back to survey the damage.
Yeah. And you're feeling very excited about like putting everything away is kind of that energy. Just nice.
Yeah.
So we have that Gemini new moon, which as we were saying before we started recording was like maybe the one nice little sweet lunation of the year or like one of the nicest ones.
Yeah. Like it's just it's less complicated. I think it's going to be a slow start though too, right? Because in the week right after we get Mercury and Saturn both stationing, Saturn stationing retrograde and Mercury stationing direct, but they're in a square to each other. And so, right, normally we would have a Mercury Saturn square for like a day, but we get it for much longer because they're both just like pausing in the square, which I feel like is really like, you know, Mercury's moving direct now, but there's like, hey, wait, like before we get going, like we're doing this like surveying the damage. This is like a new moon. Like, what are we actually doing here? Like, what are we doing?
Yeah.
Like, let's make a plan before we like.
Yeah. That is sort of like, we've have all this damage and we kind of rushed to do the initial cleanup, but now it's like, no, let's really think. Let's think long and hard about this.
Yeah.
And Mercury is stationing direct at 26 Taurus. And it's at that sort of sensitive point that we keep coming back to. So it is actually really, and like Saturn is like still squaring that point. And it's like, we actually really are dealing with that directly, I think, which is nice.
Back to that eclipse. Yeah. I mean, like, we are not just like jumping over this the way that we did with that first eclipse and everything in Pisces.
Yeah, we're like really taking a hard look.
And then Venus is like, just kidding, I'm going to conjoin Uranus and the North Node. And just like, I don't know. I feel like Venus and Taurus conjoining the North Node, like I will want a lot of Venus and Taurus at this point. It's like, have a midsummer feast with Venus on the North Node in Taurus.
Yeah, exactly.
Or that someone's going to spike the punch with Venus conjoining Uranus.
Right. Right. Though, or it could just be like, yeah. If you have it at an unexpected location, it gets unexpectedly moved to a different place, but
Right.
you still have some nice snacks. Yeah, I mean, as we're talking about all this, it's like all of this stuff, like in a world level, feels like kind of like with all the Taurus stuff, is like this is like Mother Nature giving a warning sign in a really direct way. And like and like everyone really having to regroup around that.
Right. And there's fear around that, right? Some people are going to react with denial. Some people are going to get out the big guns. Some people are going to be like, you know, we deserve this. Some people are going to be like, yes, let's take down the old world for the new, right? Like, I feel like the factions that happen around now that we get split into will like go to battle in the fall.
Yes. Yeah. But yeah, it's like sort of what everyone's role is being really defined at this point. And or like, yeah, it's like you can't not choose a team. Yeah. Choose a role.
Shoot. Yeah. And then we have Mercury gets back into Gemini. Thank you, Mercury. For the last week of Gemini season, we finally have Mercury back. Dignified. We have a Sagittarius full moon in a lovely square to Neptune.
Yeah, which is interesting too, because it's like a Sag full moon that isn't an eclipse for the first time in a couple years.
Yeah.
Which is nice.
But we still don't know what's happening.
But we still, yeah. And it's like, as much as we all had that, you know, that meeting where we really defined everything, it's very like, but nothing is ever certain or predictable.
Right. You know, I mean, it's just like a group project. Like everyone gets together, decides what they're doing. And then by the end, you're like, okay, everybody go do it. And it just like turns into chaos and everybody forgets what they were supposed to be doing and they get distracted by conversations and it's.
Though, and it also though could be the energy of like, as much as you plan, sometimes you just have to improvise and figure it out as you go.
Yeah.
Energy.
Which Gemini loves. And we have Mercury back in Gemini ready for the improv. So then a week later, we have Venus coming into Gemini.
Cancer season is starting.
Right as we're heading into Cancer season on the solstice.
And we get
a little bit quiet. Then we've got a Cancer new moon.
Square Jupiter.
So kind of just, I don't know. I like a square to Jupiter.
I think that's a nice lunation. I feel like this is like a brief, stable moment. Knock on wood. Don't speak too soon.
I mean, at least it's not afflicted by anything, right? It's funny that we're finding like this moment of peace in the cardinal.
I know. Well, and maybe that's like it's like an odd thing, because when was the last time there's been a moment of peace in a cardinal sign? Like in many years. So, and it's like a moment of peace, but it's like a moment of peace brought to you by Jupiter and Aries, like being loud on the sidelines. But
right. I mean, it's just like, I feel like it's the Cancer new moon that's just like, it can take some of that like really like healthy selfishness of Jupiter and Aries and just be like, I'm gonna stay home. I'm gonna like have family together and like we're just gonna do this. Okay, and that brings us halfway through 2022. So I'm gonna use my cardinal Mars to push your fixed Mars. Okay, so now we head into some hairier parts, which is hard to, right? Like, okay, everyone got those like 2 weeks of peace and a couple nice lunations. Like,
Yeah.
June definitely feels like kind of quieter, just in comparison to everything else.
Mhm.
We're in July, and right off the bat, Mars square Pluto.
Mars and Aries square.
Mars and Aries square Pluto and Capricorn. Right, this is the ghost of the Mars retrograde in Aries in fall of 2020.
Yes. Yeah. And then it's like later that week we do that. It's like Mars square Pluto is maybe like picking at a wound. But then Mars goes into Taurus and Mercury goes into Cancer. And so we've had this like nice season of Mars Jupiter co-presence and like things are moving a bit in that era. And now Mars is going into Taurus. As someone with Mars and Taurus, things are just going to get a little bit slow and your cow out to pasture.
Yes. I love it.
With Mercury going into Cancer. So
That's just like everyone's getting, it's like a little bit of like a timeout. It's like Mars had an outburst square to Pluto. Everyone got like a little bit overstimulated and a little bit afraid. And now everybody goes into timeout, right? Like no speaking. Mercury in Cancer, read a book, write a poem quietly.
One of the mute signs, but Mercury now also moving faster again.
We also, right, we have that transition from air and fire back into water and Earth. We have a Capricorn full moon
on the 13th.
Just seeing, it's not that bad. There's some tension to this full moon, I feel like, but it's not horrible, right? I mean, it's ruled by Saturn that's in a trine with Venus.
Yeah.
It's like not quite conjunct Pluto. It's not the worst. Not the worst.
There are a lot of much more chaotic and tense moments in this year for sure. It's like the beginning of July is definitely like that Mars square Pluto is a little bit like, oh, we're bringing back up this past ugliness and we're just kind of sitting with it.
Right. Everyone's too tired to deal with it. And it's like there's a Capricorn full moon, which is kind of like, okay, what's the adult way to deal with this? Okay, we're going to do that. And now Venus moves into Cancer. So there again, like we've got this heavy water, earth space. And then Mercury moves into Leo. So lovely.
Very nice.
Love a Mercury in Leo.
As you do. We're getting more expressive. We've got Venus in Cancer, but then also Mercury is kind of gets into the crosshairs of like Saturn and Uranus.
It gets complicated really quickly because like the last week of July, we get a preview of like how complicated August is going to get, where it's like, okay, Mercury's going to square Mars, and then Mercury's going to square Uranus, and then Mercury's going to square the North Node, and then Mercury's going to oppose Saturn.
Yeah. And that's like giving me the vibes of kind of like July 2021 of just, of like mind being put against all of this like big stuff that's happening. And it's, but also being overwhelmed by it, but also just being inspired by it, moved by it.
Right. And I almost think like it's nice to send Mercury through it first because Mercury's gonna think its way through it.
Yes. Yeah.
So
and Mercury's moving like pretty quick at this point too. So.
So that square with Mars, that's a little tricky, but I also feel like that's just, that's more of like Mercury poking at Mars and Taurus. When Mercury hits that Uranus on the North Node, right? And Uranus is going to exactly conjoin the North Node on the last day of the month. We've got these kind of like big, fresh ideas. It's going to square Saturn right after that. So we're going to be dealing with the practicality of them. But it's like, okay, it almost like, right, like that's the Mercury in a fire sign that's like waking us up and ramping us up for a very complicated August. So it just feels like get your like rest as much as you can in June and lean into the like the Cancer Taurus vibes of July.
Yeah, because
then August is like the Trojan War.
Yeah. And it really is like that sort of the Mars, Uranus, North Node, cope, like triple conjunction, essentially. And co-presence. And as much as I feel like a lot of people are like very freaked out about the Uranus and North Node and like especially in regards to like the climate stuff and the food stuff and all of that that's going on, I went down a wormhole of researching like previous Uranus North Node conjunctions, and there was a Uranus North Node and Mars co-presence in like March and April 2007. And some of the stuff that was going on then was like it was the first month ever that like Toyota was selling more cars than GM because everyone wanted to start buying Priuses and hybrid cars. And there was like this hybrid surge at that time.
Oh, cool.
And it was also the day of, I guess there's this thing called like Free Earth Hour or Free Earth Day, where everyone would just like stop using electricity for a day. That feels very like late aughts, like save the environment. But it started for the first time in Australia that year. And it feels like sort of, that was all Mars, Uranus, and North Node in Pisces. And this is all in Taurus. And so I feel like there is something especially with the sort of like climate stuff and the food stuff and the sort of societal coming together, that is very motivating, that aspect, potentially.
Yeah. There was a Leo new moon in there too that we're kind of, because like, yeah, we need to get into August, but yeah, there's a Leo new moon that is trying to Jupiter as it's stationing retrograde in Aries. Again, not a bad one. I feel like there's some okay ones in here.
Yeah.
There's like a little bit of healthy optimism in there.
Totally.
Jupiter stations at 8 degrees of Aries is going to move back into a little bit of Pisces throughout there. Leo new moon, we all remember who we are for the climate war to come. Okay, yeah. And then as you've been talking about, that kind of triple conjunction happening on the last day of July, the first day of August. And then we've got Mars square Saturn.
And it's Mars in Taurus square Saturn, which is major frustration energy.
Right. Met, I think, with the extreme fear of the next day having Venus opposite Pluto.
And Venus is like ruling Mars at that point. Yeah, all of that together screams, as much as like I think the Mars Uranus North Node is very motivating, that screams kind of like disappointment energy to me. Yeah. Or just worry. It's just, yeah. It's
and
like,
then and I think that like feeds into the next couple days with the Sun square Uranus in the North Node. Building up towards an Aquarius full moon conjunct Saturn, right?
Yeah, square Uranus in the North Node. Yeah, this is very, it's like going to battle. It's like, I'm really motivated and we lost the first round. Now I'm trying to rally again. And this is really hard work.
Yeah. I mean, this full moon in Aquarius, right? Again, we're halfway between eclipse cycles. It's just a mess, right? Conjunct Saturn, square Uranus on the North Node.
And then Venus is going into Leo.
And then that's like the Venus into Leo ingress chart. of just, yeah, I don't know what she thinks she's doing.
Venus, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that, yeah, it's like this August is like
I think we'll see like a lot of peacocking on social media around the sense of despair. Anyway, sorry to interrupt you, but
no, no, no. I agree with that. I think this is really like everyone is like their heart's bleeding, they're upset, but they're also like sharing about it. Yeah, exactly. Writing about it. We all know Venus is going into Leo and it's personal for everyone, but it's also like Saturn's in the mix. So it's feeling really like, why not me? Why not my time? Why isn't this working already? Yeah.
I stopped using electricity for 1 day.
Yeah. And nothing happened.
It was really hard.
Yeah. A lot of performative activism potentially. But then that's maybe just what we're seeing, and there's other stuff going on like a more lower key level that actually helpful.
Yeah. We'll have the sun oppose Saturn then, right? Like just right after this, which I feel like we'll be like calling everybody on it.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, let's stop.
Exactly. And then, then we go into, we're about to hit Virgo season, but Mars first goes into Gemini.
Right. And Mars is going to be in Gemini for the rest of the year and into 2023 because of a retrograde. So we are really going to get to know Mars and Gemini. And that was part of our like pre-show chat, is talking about this archetype. But I wrote an article during the Mars and Aries retrograde, where I looked back historically at Mars and Aries. And there was an interesting thing that I found, that when Mars was retrograde in Aries during the Civil War, we had the bloodiest day in US history, the Battle of Antietam. But it was that battle being a stalemate that gave Lincoln the confidence to issue the Emancipation Proclamation. But it wasn't ratified by the states until the Mars retrograde in Gemini 2 years after that.
Okay.
So, that makes me a little bit hopeful for like the cycle of social justice, and right, Mars being so charged up and fighting these battles in Aries, that then when it's retrograding in the sign of the People, things are actually like making headway.
Totally. And that the Mars retrograde is going to kind of mirror the degrees of the Venus retrograde in Gemini from 2020, I think. Or it's at least it's like got that similar. And when you're talking about like social justice stuff, that was like that Venus retrograde in Gemini was such a turning point too.
Right. Right.
Thinking about that. That's interesting. That's a silver lining of this Mars and Gemini. I mean, I'm very fond of Mars and Gemini people. But it really is like, it's sometimes a lot of talk and no action. It can be, or it can be a lot of action that doesn't have a very specific goal.
Right.
That really needs to be focused.
Yeah. I mean, Gemini, so creative and gets bored so easily. That's
it's definitely a very like multi-hyphenate talent. It's like someone who's like, I have a lot of interests and I know a lot about everything. But I like get bored if I'm doing the same thing for more than 5 minutes, essentially.
Right. And the like FOMO of Mars and Gemini is excruciating.
And wants to know all the details of what's going on in everyone's life and everything. but it's
Mhm.
also like an amazing researcher, like an amazing like writer in many, it's just like amazing communication. But it's very like, well, maybe this is my bias, but it's like funny, witty, amazing communication that like when it can be wrangled is like, here's this like treat of genius that's I've like culled from these from all these like blatherings sometimes.
Right. And so maybe that retrograde will be about like, okay, how do we turn all this Gemini talk into action?
Mm-hmm. Like, let's find the pieces of brilliance in
Yeah.
this like amazing collection of information.
Right. And I think that we might see a lot of stuff around censorship come up around then. I feel
Mm-hmm.
like that whole battle is kind of charging up, and we'll see, with the censorship of social media
Mm-hmm.
stuff going on around there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We
I know.
have, yeah. So we'll dive into that a bunch because it's going to be there for the rest of the year. That's the Mars thing. We've got Mercury opposite Neptune, which kind of is just so funny for the Mars ingress chart, right? That its ruler is opposite Neptune. I feel like in the same way that we have Pluto, like in the backdrop of a lot of 2020, we have Neptune like all up in a lot of stuff too.
Yeah. Yeah. Like caught like being like, shh, don't look at me, but I'm actually messing everything up over here, but don't worry about it. I just want you to dream big.
Right. Or like believe this conspiracy.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. That's a lot of, yeah, that Mercury opposite Neptune. I'm like, Trump's going to make some big announcement about his fake social media network day,
Right.
truth or whatever.
And then Uranus stations on the North Node, which
Mhm.
is just like, really?
I
You
know.
had to station on the North Node, right? I mean, the very least, right? The North Node tends to expand the energy of things.
Mhm.
And Uranus, as if it wasn't already like in this co-presence with the North Node, like not getting enough airtime, not heading into this very volatile fall, is like, I'm going to station on the North Node and you can just get me on the North Node.
Mhm.
And right away, Venus, the ruler of the North Node, and Uranus is going to square them both. And the
Mhm.
sun is going to square Mars. And we have just like, this is like, this is the war.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the war. It's the like throwing it all out there and just being like, this is it. Um, we're at a fever pitch and I'm just gonna like give it my best shot kind of
Right.
vibe.
And a Virgo new moon is going to try and figure it all out on the 27th, square to Mars in Gemini, right?
Yeah.
Everyone's ruled by Mercury. Mercury's in Virgo
Mhm.
still, I think. Looks like I maybe left out the ingresses on
Yeah. I think Mercury is in.
Libra at this point. August was so much, it was like how to.
Mercury goes into Libra on the 27th. So it's
Oh,
still.
okay. I have the 25th, but yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, right there in the war, Mercury is like doing the diplomacy thing. There's
Yeah.
this new moon to like try and figure out the diplomatic strengths.
Mm-hmm. It's like a little bit too little, too late. That
Yeah.
Virgo moon.
Yeah.
It's
We're
like,
already into the breach.
yeah.
And then we get Venus opposite Saturn and Venus under the beams. And suddenly, like all the peace treaties are forgotten.
Mm-hmm. Or yeah, and it's like all the sort of Venusian work we're doing is like happening uh in a like an invisible way. And it's just not, we're not getting, yeah, the peacekeeper is like, I'm actually going underground now, and you'll have to schedule my office hours.
Yeah.
Uh,
And that brings us into September. And right, she's under the beams and she goes into her fall. So it's kind of like, okay, that is kind of like, okay, well, you weren't that helpful anyway. So
yeah. Yeah, go under the beams.
go under the beams.
Be in Virgo where you're gonna, but that I feel like is also like that Venus and Virgo, like I want to tidy everything up. And I love through like you know, cleaning out your air vents and making sure that everything's in its right place. Like,
and it's like, that's nice, but that's not totally relevant to what's happening right now.
mhm. Yeah. And in a way, I feel like it's like almost like we're not seeing like real compassion from people after there's just been all of this like tense
Yeah.
eruption and upset.
Yeah. And I feel like September kind of has that vibe a little bit like June of being like, what happened, right? We've got Mercury stations retrograde in Libra on
Mhm.
September 9th to kind of be like, okay, like where did the diplomacy fail?
Right.
We have a
Yeah.
Pisces full moon that's like, hey guys, like remember when we were all with Jupiter
Yeah.
and like we all like ate sunshine and rainbows and talked about our feelings? Like,
Yeah.
and it's square to Mars, well, loosely square to Mars. Like,
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, that's gonna be that's another like too little too late lunation.
yeah. And then, right. And then we have Venus square Mars, which is just like the complete breakdown.
And that's also like after we had those Venus Mars conjunctions earlier in the year, that's sort of our first check in. That's like their first
Yeah.
hard aspect to each other since then.
Yeah. And I like, I like squares and mutable signs because I feel like it kind of helps mutable signs focus on what they're doing. But it's
Mhm.
also like, okay, you guys aren't super helpful with what's going on right now.
Right. And that square, like when people have that in their natal chart, it's always just like such a constant struggle with like dissatisfaction and like just like motivate, like just like not like wanting and needing different things from everything. There's like always this negotiation that needs to be going on. Um, so that again is sort of like, again, we're like Venus, like where is your compassion? Like, what's happening?
And then, right, Mercury retrogrades back into Virgo to be like, okay, I'm going to clean up this house.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you're trying, Venus, but it's not very good.
Right. I'm only gonna like go into like these very sort of like last degrees of Virgo, but we'll figure it out. And I think the Mercury Cazimi is at 0. I think all the Mercury Cazimis and the retrogrades are at like 0, or no, are at 0 degrees of like the air signs.
Yeah.
Which are always like, I feel like these Mercury retrograde stories are kind of all tying into that like Venus Mars conjunction and even the Great conjunction. And there's like these Mercury retrogrades are all kind of being like, let's think about the big picture. Yeah. Of like what we all really need to head into the future while we're in this like current war to get ourselves through the present.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. These like reevaluating moments. Yeah. There's just so much frustration.
Mm-hmm. There's frustration and it like doesn't feel like there's anything we can do about it. But I think it's like because it's just like not being solved immediately. Yeah. And there maybe is more happening than we feel or that we trust is happening, but it's like no, it's not in the way that like 2021 it was like progress felt impossible. This is like progress is happening, but it's like not the progress we want, and there's not enough like analysis or processing of it. It's just like happening, maybe.
Yeah, because it's so divided that people are like, people are doing their own thing and it's really just like undoing each other's work. We've got a new moon opposite
Jupiter.
So right, again, we've got Jupiter in here. I don't know, for some reason I feel less good about this one. Like,
I know, I feel like it's because it's a Libra. It's like the battle of like the Libra Aries energy. At this point in the year too, when it's like Jupiter and Aries making this sort of last ditch effort to be like, come on, feel good about yourself. like go for it. And the new moon in Libra is like, don't you know that life is more complicated than
Then your simple answer, right? Yeah. Mercury's retrograde.
Yeah.
It's ruled by Venus in her fall. Trining Pluto. Like,
that's some complicated energy.
Yeah.
That new moon is not like that Cancer new moon. But I think it has like kind of similar shades, but we're just at a different place in the year than we were at that Cancer time. And I think it's maybe like it's almost a resting point or like a rallying point, but it feels like pointless or something at that point in the year.
Right. Yeah. And then we get Venus into Libra, and that was the third quarter of 2022, which just feels not great.
Yeah, well, it feels like you get it's like a little bit of rest and then no rest for the weary and then weary.
Yeah. And it's like, okay, and now October is going to build back into eclipse season. So we get Mercury direct, but it stations direct opposite Neptune.
Yes, so lovely.
Great. Thanks. Great.
So lovely.
But it can do, it's doing okay in the sign of its exaltation and its rulership, but hopefully that's inspired. Yes. Pluto goes direct.
So it's like just when you forgot about her, she's back.
She's back. And we have an Aries full moon. Conjunct Chiron.
Right.
And Venus. Yeah. This is a complicated moon with Mars square Neptune.
And it's being ruled by Mars.
Yeah.
Yeah, that Mars in Gemini. That's a little bit of a chaos Aries full moon.
Yeah. Sure. And we're getting, right? Like October brings us into the time when Saturn and Uranus are in the same degree, when they're both in 18 degrees. And so this is kind of like the tightest crunch of those squares coming back, which they don't get exact to the arc minute, but they're in the same degree for like this whole time.
Right.
And we start moving through this like the like Scorpio gauntlet, right? Or actually I was noticing in Libra season, there's this with Mars and Gemini, planets start moving through a trine to Saturn, then a trine to Mars, then a square to Pluto, which is like not quite the like fixed sign gauntlet that we've been seeing things move through, but is like, yeah.
Trine to Saturn, trine to Mars, and then square to Pluto. Right. Which is, I mean, trine to Saturn is, I love the Libra planets trining Saturn. Yeah. It's really nice. Trine to that Mars. I think the Libra and Gemini kind of are fun for each other.
Yeah. I think it's kind of motivational, and then they hit the square with Pluto, and it's like, you just realize like it's just the downfall of the air signs of thinking like, right, yes, in an ideal universe that would work.
Yeah, it is it's like the disappointment after feeling motivated once again. Yeah. And then we get Mercury goes into Libra. Oh, and then we have the Venus Cazimi as Scorpio season starts this month.
Right. So Venus conjoins the sun. Saturn stations direct on the same day, but like in that square to Uranus. And I mean that last week of October, the like October section of Scorpio season is just like filled. It's like all the energy comes back all at once and like doesn't really
Yeah.
Right? Because they're going to Cazimi, right? Venus and the sun have their Cazimi at 29 Libra. And you're like, right? I mean, that's the transition point. Venus is still under the beams. We haven't had her in a long time. She's becoming the evening star.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like, that feels like a very Saturn station, Cazimi.
Yeah. Yeah, and it is Venus in her home, but it's like the very end of the sign before she goes into fall or into exile.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
then she and the sun go into Scorpio.
And right after
then we have a partial solar eclipse conjunct that Venus, the very, very beginning of Scorpio, bringing us into the second eclipse season. Jupiter retrogrades back into Pisces.
Right, which is kind of cute.
Yeah. Thanks.
In the midst of all of this, but it's like, again, it's like one of those things where it's like retrograding back into Pisces when we've just started Scorpio season. So even though it's like a trine, it's like the Scorpio sun has to go a long way to get to Jupiter.
Right. I mean, again, it's like, okay, that's nice, but it's not particularly relevant.
Which is also like, unfortunately, like the story of being of Pisces, just in general sometimes. Where it's like everyone's like, this is like why this is what we're talking about, and the Pisces is like, listen, we all have to have some hope, some optimism. We have to think big about something. I don't know. But yeah, that right after that eclipse, and then Mercury goes into Scorpio, so we're back to like not talking.
Right. It's interesting that these Jupiter into Aries happened in between eclipses, and Jupiter retrograding back into Pisces happens in between those eclipses.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what to make of that, but that's interesting that it's kind of timing that.
Well, it's almost like in the first eclipses, it's like Jupiter and Pisces is giving too much. It's like, this is too much. And now this time it's like, okay, we need you back in on the field.
We need to come back together.
Like you're functional, but we need your energy right
now. Then we've got Mercury into Scorpio, and then Mars stations retrograde. Again, guess which degree? Like the degree 2021 and 2022, stations retrograde at 25 degrees.
Yeah, crazy.
And now we're in Scorpio season with a retrograde ruler.
Yeah. Which is interesting too, because even saying like Mercury goes into Scorpio and it's like, but it's also Mercury and Scorpio ruled by Mars and Gemini.
Right. There's a mutual reception, but they're also an aversion to each other. Right.
Yeah. And so, there's like still some, it's like the Mars and and interestingly, that could be like a helpful tool for like culling some of the Mars and Gemini expansive thought.
Yeah, right. That Mercury and Scorpio can really focus things down. Yeah.
This is like the little aphorism we're going to take from your thousands of pages of notes. Like here's the summary. But it's hard. But that's when that Mars retrograde starts, and it's retrograde until the beginning of January. I feel like for some reason this is a slightly longer Mars retrograde than usual.
I think Mars retrogrades are always surprisingly long. Mars is retrograde for 10 weeks.
Right.
Which is longer than any. Yeah, Mars goes direct on January 12th of 2023.
Right.
So
I guess it's like November and December, but because it stations in October and doesn't station direct until January, it feels like it's actually those whole 4 months instead of just the weeks. But wow. Right.
Yeah. And then when we head into November, right, we're like back into the fixed gauntlet of like, right, Venus is still really close to the sun. Mercury's there. Mercury's going to go first. They're all going to conjoin the south node, oppose Uranus on the north node, and square Saturn. But I feel like this is the depressing version because they're not like on the north node getting amped up.
Right. Yeah. And yeah, it's like all these planets in Scorpio on the south node. It's not the Leo planets just being like, I'm plowing ahead. It's the Scorpio planet like resigning itself to Saturn and resigning itself to the south node.
Ruled by a retrograde Mars. Like,
and we're still in the middle of eclipse season.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And yeah, this is a different, it's like the first eclipse season is like chaos rave, and this eclipse season is like yeah, I'm trying to think of where it is. Where is it? It's not in a fun place. It's like a kind of boring. It's like at a conference. I don't know. It's maybe like at like a conference where there's like a lot of people and a lot of people to talk to, but like everything's kind of boring or everything's like depressing.
Yeah, I was gonna say depressing.
Yeah,
I was thinking like it's like I keep bringing everything back to addiction because I'm reading Gabor Mate's book In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts. And I'm like, this is like a conference about how to treat addiction. Like, you may be learning useful tools, but the subject matter is so heartbreaking.
Right. And I think I when I said boring, I didn't even mean boring. I meant like futile almost. Yeah. It's like the definition is like depressing, but it's also like I've already heard this too, or like I don't feel like I can do anything with this.
Right. Mars being retrograde in Gemini, he's almost like totally overstimulated. It's like underwhelming and overwhelming at the same time of like, it's too much information about stuff that I feel like I can't do anything about.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to shut down and like play Candy Crush in the back of the audience.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a totally different kind of like dissociation than the first one.
Yeah.
Like, let me take drugs, and this one's like, let me numb myself like in this, but not in a way that's like euphoric, like the first eclipse season.
Yeah. And so then I think, then we've got the second eclipse, which I feel like can kind of like pulls us out of this horrible place that we're left in. It's not fun, but it is, I think, because it's a lunar eclipse with the moon right on Uranus, the sun right on Mercury, like getting really close to that Cazimi, square to Saturn. Venus is very close. Mars is like not really involved that much.
Right. Just
as much,
sun. Which just ruling the Scorpio planets, but
yeah. There's almost like it's like you stop dissociating, I feel like, with this.
Especially because it's like the moon it's like conjunct Mercury, and the moon and Mercury together is such a like, I have to think about this and solve this, and it's a lot.
The moon is opposite Mercury.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Right.
But it's the moon on Uranus opposite Mercury.
Right. Like moon and Mercury aspects like that in general are just always like, what? Yeah, like let me think about this. Let me overthink about this. Like I'm back online.
Yeah. It's gonna be very buzzy. Like
definitely. Yeah.
And then we have Venus come out from under the beams.
At I believe 26 Scorpio. But that's when we're finally like, oh, you're finally back. You've been under since August, so now you're finally back.
Yeah. Finally back. And then so it's like mid-November. It's like if you can just survive from late July until mid-November.
Right.
Then Venus goes into Sag, Mercury goes into Sag, Mars retrograde is going to square Neptune, whatever, not helpful. But then we have Sag season, and this is really fun because, right, this is our like first and only Sag season with Jupiter in Pisces.
And yeah, we're getting like, it's like, and it's of course Jupiter is like in these final last little degrees of Pisces, but it's like we're getting to drink this like sweet nectar in the way that we kind of got to in the like Pisces season with Jupiter and Pisces. But this is also not Jupiter under the sun. It's like Jupiter is in its own separate place. It's separated from Neptune instead of applying to Neptune.
Right. And it's and it stations direct right on the Sag new moon.
Gorgeous.
Right? So we've got the Sag new moon and really early Sagittarius, 1 degree of Sagittarius, Jupiter stations as part of that new moon. It's nice. We get like Thanksgiving 2022, like is probably going to be good.
Yeah, I think that's going to be like a lovely time, but it really is like a lovely time that's like a rallying effort after this really this long struggle.
It's like the way that like all food tastes better when you're camping. Like the Thanksgiving meal of 2022 is just gonna be like beautiful. And then then we get to the end of November and Venus and Mercury are gonna oppose Mars retrograde.
We're sort of in like the mid-ish point when that starts happening, of the Mars retrograde, where it's like, to me, we're getting close to it. The peak of the Mars retrograde a bit.
And it also feels like, they're doing okay. Like they're ruled by Jupiter in Pisces, like they're opposing Mars, Mercury rules Mars, like I don't know. They're almost like just like shouting at Mars, like it gets better. And then we've got, so now we're in December. Neptune goes direct
at 22 degrees Pisces. Neptune goes direct.
And then Mercury goes into Capricorn.
That's interesting. That's like tempering some of the Sag season excitement and sort of freewheelingness that was already tempered with Mars retrograde opposing Mercury and Venus, but we're getting back where it's like we're going back to where we started in the beginning of the year.
Oh God. People watching all the way through this video to get to that line. And now we're back to where we started at the beginning of the year. And we've got Mercury going into Capricorn, which at least it's picking up a little bit of dignity. Right before a Gemini full moon that is going to be conjoining a retrograde Mars in the middle of the Sun Mars opposition, which would be the midpoint of that Mars retrograde, or like not necessarily the midpoint on like calendar days, but the midpoint in terms of spatially. With that Sun opposition. So the Mars retrograde should probably get easier after that, or like a little bit less intense. That Gemini full moon is kind of using Mercury as its grounding cord, so to speak.
Totally. It's a Gemini full moon ruled by Mercury and Cap. It's a very sobering vibe.
And it's in like Saturn is trining that moon too, so like holding it down a little bit.
And Mercury and Cap is also now ruling the Mars retrograde, so that's an interesting dynamic too. It's quieter.
And then Venus goes into Capricorn. Now we really are back to where we started
in the beginning of the year.
And we're like heading into all of these earth signs. And then On the solstice, Jupiter is like, let's light those fires back up.
Right.
I'm an
And
Aries.
that's like, yeah, one of the big differences between the beginning of 2022 and then the end of 2022 is like we're ending it with Jupiter and Aries, and we're starting it with that fire, that huge cheerleader energy.
And right after that, right, we get a new moon, a Capricorn new moon, the day before Christmas Eve, square to that Jupiter. So it's like, you know, again, I like it.
At least all the cardinal lunations have this like,
yeah,
kind of annoying, but you appreciate, listen, this talk has inspired me that I want to write like a survival guide for when there's no fire in the chart based on my own experiences.
Yeah.
Because you need that Jupiter and Aries sometimes, even though you're like, okay, they're being really cringe and annoying, but I like it. It's making me feel good.
It's making things happen.
Yeah.
And that new moon too has Venus in Capricorn in a trine to Uranus and Taurus. And so like there's a little bit of like, I don't know, like there maybe not the Jupiter is like there's a light at the end of the tunnel. The Venus trine to Uranus is like, okay, we did some things, and then come on, just the worst. Okay, then we get Mercury goes retrograde, conjunct Venus, conjunct Pluto.
Just to end the year on a note of
on the 29th. Yeah, Venus has that exact conjunction with Pluto on the 31st.
Yeah, I mean, okay. What's my like positive Pisces spin on this? So if it's like the beginning of 2021, when we were also the beginning of 2022, which we were also starting with this Venus retrograde conjunct Pluto. This is kind of us, we're coming back around to the same stuff, but it's not going retrograde. We're not reviewing the situation again, but though Mercury is going retrograde, that's different. It's different, but Mercury is there. And so it's sort of like the mind and the heart are all sort of focusing together, like really in unison rather than kind of in like around, which they were at the beginning of this year. It's more like, okay, we're together on this. It's like a new perspective once again, but it is heavy, definitely a heaviness.
Yeah, I'm like looking into January of 2023, like, is there anything to save us? No, not that it's gonna be, it's just gonna, right? Like what we're describing is a year that is at the very least very complicated. And so how you're gonna feel on New Year's Eve is gonna be looking back on a year that was very complicated for everyone, probably. For us collectively, for us personally, in our relationships, in our individual work. And I think part of that with that Venus Pluto conjunction is realizing how much we do really care about our puny little human experiences here.
Totally.
And Mercury, Venus is going to be an evening star at that point. And I feel like the gift of Venus as the evening star is like really having a profound sense of gratitude. Because I think that like what our desires look like in their kind of crone form in their evening star is gratitude. And right, some of us are going to be feeling very, very plutonic levels of gratitude about the stuff that we made it through in 2022.
Totally. Yeah, that is a very good way of putting it. Yeah. It being that evening star too is like we're no longer in a state of like yearning about it. It's like yearning to, again, it's like the gratitude and this place of gratitude and like awareness, I think, of just of like all that's on the plate,
Right.
all that we want and all that we desire, and like a certain discernment about it. Yeah.
Right.
But it will be heavy, but and a good cry, but it's also a moment it's like a marking moment rather than a beginning. It's not the beginning, it's like a marking time moment.
Yeah. And right, like after this, I mean, don't quote me on this, but Pluto goes into Aquarius in 2023. So we're not going to get like, this is not something that is going to keep happening.
Yeah.
It's just something that frames this year.
Yeah.
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 Well, thank you, everyone. If you made it through, if you watched this in pieces, thanks for joining us. I hope it's helpful. You can reach out to me or Jamie for some personalized astrological guidance, what it's going to look like for you, or at any point during the year if you need to get your bearings a little bit. Jamie, thank you so much for slogging your way through this.
Thank you. No, it was fun. I mean, it's good to talk through these things with a friend.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. I will post all where you can find Jamie's work and where you can find my work in the description of this video. And yeah, I hope you have an interesting 2022. I am very excited to see who we all become, hopefully greater in patience and compassion. And yeah, if nothing else, we live in interesting times.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'll see you guys for monthly forecasts, and hopefully Jamie will join me for some of those. And Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Thanks, guys.